Okay, there's a call recording started. Oh, and someone just joined.
Good. Looks like Mike. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the June 11th the Crowbar community meeting. Our topic today is a design cycle, and we had queued up a whole bunch of topics to talk about our design meeting. If I can find the right user pad for it. Oh, by the way, while I'm waiting for the page to load, I have been driving Crowbar as just enough orchestration, pretty much using that 100-word phrase. It's one of the things, we can start there. One of the things that we were supposed to talk about was this, the Crowbar elevator pitch. And I've been describing OpenCrowbar using the phrase just enough orchestration to provision physical infrastructure. And that's get a very positive response. People seem to understand what that is. And ready state also continues to be a very effective tool to say Crowbar gets you to ready state, do other stuff on top of it. That's one thing I do get to do quite a bit of on these trips.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I might move ready state up in that phrase. Just enough orchestration to provision and maintain ready state for any brand of... Yeah, just kind of put that first.
Oh, it's fun. I didn't even put ready state into this.
It's a little further down, right? You had ready state for any brand of physical infrastructure. Oh. Yeah, but just move it up.
Got it. Like it. Oh, you know what? And it actually should be an open ops framework. Yeah, and I've been talking to people at the Cloud Foundry Summit. If we were actually going to have ready state that kicked off Cloud Foundry, that would be cool. Or even allow Bosch to interface to the Crowbar APIs.
Mm-hmm.
That would also be interesting. Okay. Other comments on this? Let's see. Well, I'm going to read it just because it's short. An open ops framework with just enough orchestration to provision and maintain ready state for any brand of physical infrastructure with RAID BIOS and networking fully configured for scale-out application deployments like OpenStack, Ceph, and Hadoop. A long sentence. It works alongside tools like Chef and Puppet to integrate standard operational services into an integrated system.
Kind of works for me. It is a long sentence. Might be tempted to stop after RAID BIOS and networking fully considered. Make that one sentence. Because the trick to elevator pitch is you always have to have a short version of the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
And then the second sentence would, yeah, Crowbar is used for scale-out application deployments, like a list of examples, and works alongside.
If we did this. And then the system.
Works alongside tools like Chef and Puppet to integrate standard operation.
It works along.
I like that. It works alongside tools like Chef and Puppet. Yeah, it's a question of which one we want to put first. I do think we want to mention the scale-out deployments, because that's really the canonical use case.
Actually, just take out the word. And take out deployment application. Okay. Better. We should keep tweaking it.
We got too many integrateds in there. But yeah, I like the first sentence. That really summarizes it.
Oops, you're right.
To integrate standard operational services.
The thing that I was trying to get, and we went back and forth, talked about this ready state page. Oops, I don't know which one it is now. Was that it was really important to describe this as a system tool, not as a. So I was trying to get the word system in there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty good for a current cut.
Okay.
It'd be nice to see that on the home page of the website.
Sorry, my hotel internet is fast. Wow. All right, so back to the actual meeting. We want to talk about this? We did, yay. And then for the other thing I was interested in doing was actually talking about the spec, if we have time to do that. So Victor, did you look at this design document at all? Notes?
No.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is probably just summarize it a little bit. Let's review it briefly and then look at it. So some of this was Rajiv making notes as he learned what OpenCrowbar did. And one of the things I liked was that he actually called out using these commands would be the way to do the initial discovery out of band for WS-man. And this is all about going after the WS-man and then what calls to use for that. So it's pretty down deep, including sample workflows and stuff like that. I think we need to take a step higher for this, because the thing I don't know is, would we design for hardware interface? It seems like we would, right? Victor?
I don't know. It's the sort of thing I would want to do some exploratory coding around.
What approach would you take to do out-of-band configuration? Actually, well, let's start with let's document a design goal, right? So we had a design goal, which was a single. It was a parent superclass.
Well, no, they're all jigs. Anything that does something to a node is a jig.
You the chef or puppet. You can't use the chef or puppet jigs because those actually operate differently, or the SSH jig. So you do need a new jig, right?
I would probably need a few new jigs.
Would you create a super jig that would have some shared capability?
Rob, stop talking crack. There's no such thing as a super jig in there.
A super jig. Yeah. I mean, it's in a perfect world, the notion of having a single jig to do all this stuff would be nice, but yeah, I think you'd end up
for a perfect world.
Yeah, exactly. We live in the real world we live in the real world, and I don't see a clean abstraction because every hardware vendor is different. It and I'm not writing the code. It could be that there would end up being an IPMI jig more so than a vendor specific. Judd was following up on this. He sent an email to the list. He was looking for any references on what's out there for various BIOS versions for different hardwares and tools available. And I've never been able to find anything. So I think it plays into this conversation a little.
Is there a generic base that we that was sort of where Rajiv was going, and so I feel like we should try and answer that question a little bit.
No, there's no generic base. There's just an interface that they all adhere to.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I mean, I think there's an interface that they all share. At the lower levels, there are some APIs they're all calling, but.
So what does that interface look like?
I have no idea.
What do you think
Yeah.
we need? No, just brainstorm.
No, let's not brainstorm. Let's not do anything along those lines until we actually start coding it.
Yeah. One of the things I'm a little concerned about, and I'm not sure if this is a recurring pattern, but in the past, some of the configurations for, say, an OpenStack were different to configurations for a Hadoop or a Ceph when you get down at this level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to understand. That's why I think these are jigs, because I think there will have to be bar clamps that do the hardware settings for those individual applications, whatever they are. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense.
Well, the architecture for that I've had in mind this whole time is that roles get notified whenever a node is added or it is changed. And one of the many things that the roles can do whenever a node is added or changed is classify it as to how desirable it is. And we would want to build a mechanism that would, whenever you say, I want this node to be a Hadoop node, to make sure that configuration, or make sure that the desired configuration that's attached to that role is reflected in the desirability of the role, and for whatever hardware mangling jig we wind up using on the node to be able to go through and be able to pick that configuration up when it comes time to run.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That
We
also
wouldn't have like a dedicated data bag of just a standard setting. We would just a standard setting for how the node should look. We would that'd be up to the Hadoop or the OpenStack or the whatever role to have to give their desired configuration to the hardware jig whenever the node is being processed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. That also starts getting us towards one of the problems we deal with in Hadoop. Probably also, say, Ceph or OpenStack, but what's the right way to handle an event like a disk addition or a disk replacement? And if the roles are getting notified when something changes, that's a good way for us to trigger the code to handle those changes. That's not really hardware stuff, but it falls into that same category.
Well, interesting question, because we wouldn't necessarily get notified automatically. You would have to reapply a role. Unless
Yeah, and I'll get a separate thread going on that, because I actually think that's better. Today, we don't get notified, but one of the things about a disk replacement is there's a manual intervention anyhow. Somebody has to physically replace the drive. And when that happens, there are a sequence of events that need to take place. So as long as there's a hook, when we make a change on the Crowbar side, if the roles get notified, that gives us hooks to start triggering the appropriate processes to do whatever's needed for that drive.
No, I think that's definitely doable.
But I'm a little further up the stack. I'm formatting file systems. We need to make sure the controllers are setup, but in some cases, controllers might need to be tweaked so that it overlap a little bit with the RAID concept.
Yeah.
Well, it's depending on the flow of roles, which is one of the things I want to talk about. It would be the logic would be able to come in and say, all right, I've noticed you don't match the desired configuration, and then make the required changes. Right? That's what the network bar clamp does. That's pretty common for what we've done, and it's what all the chef logic does that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that, and Victor, I love naming things. One of the things that's on my mind about this is, what do we call the roles? At least the no-op role that we're trying to target. And do we split no-op roles for RAID and BIOS, or I don't know. Have you thought about that?
I have not.
So let me back up a step, because I'm always bugged until I've resolved this. Do we call it hardware? Do we call it metal? Do we call it? Rajiv had HAL in there as a thing.
What, for the names of the roles?
For the base name. So far, we've called it the hardware bar clamp, which seems very clear to me. It's long, but who cares if it's long? That's equally covering of switches. So let's say one of the things that, for me, my thought is does the hardware bar clamp ultimately include switch configuration if we're going to do it, or would that end up being a network workload?
That's a different thing. If we're going to wind up doing configurations, we're going to represent switches as nodes.
Right. So should we call this workload the node, or the metal node, or something like that, or the bare node?
I don't think that I want to worry about names right now.
I know, but you're going to have to name it at some point, and then we're going to be stuck with whatever names we pick. So
that's right.
That's what I don't mind doing is having a discussion of some of the options, and then when we get to it, do it. Right now it's hardware, and that's the way the bar clamp is named, and I would, unless there's a real issue with it, I would stick to that. The other option is to call it server.
Nah, I don't want to call it server.
Because
server is just so overloaded in so many contexts.
Yeah, don't call it server, please.
Yeah.
The
other alternative I would consider is metal, just because that's, the concept of bare metal is so widely used. Getting back to our short description.
Maybe we could call it the metal abstraction layer instead of the hardware abstraction layer.
It actually works very well for me. Where did I put the 100-word thing? There it is. You could also call it the physical. That makes me think of Jane Fonda. Dear. There's a part of me that likes metal. From that, actually, you know what, Victor? Just from the simple aspect of what is searchable and easy to find inside of the code base, the metal might actually be a very good choice, because I don't think we use the term metal anywhere specifically, do we?
I don't think so.
Okay. Cool. So that makes sense. And I think it's easy. It's conceivable enough. It fits in with the tool theme. pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, if we were doing a set of roles that ended with a no-op role, something like metal ready would probably be the likely no-op candidate. That matches what we've done with other no-op chains. Would that be a logical? So if I was actually, I like ready is nice because it lines up with the ready state words we've been using. And so if you said, oh, I've got to a metal ready state, people would understand what that meant pretty intuitively. And that differentiates you from being OS ready or even hardware ready from that perspective. Cool. Any issues with the direction this is going?
No, it makes sense to me.
Victor, are you cool with it?
Sure.
I mean, if you get in there or whoever gets and it doesn't make sense, then we can change it. I'm tempted to leave I think it's probably confusing to leave the workload repo called hardware if everything inside of it's called metal, but maybe that doesn't matter that much. Oh, probably doesn't matter because the jig and the roles are separate from the repo name, aren't they? Pretty distinctly separate.
Yeah.
So if in the hardware repo we might end up including configurations or something like that and just add it into that repo without it being any conflict at all. Okay. Yeah. Good. I'm watching the time. And then from a design perspective on some of this, so Victor, right now we use OHI to inventory the system. This calls out, we could do out of band and use WSMan to enumerate systems and data in here.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It depends on how much stuff we could get from the enumeration.
Right, and it can exist side by side with the OHI data. That ends up not being a problem. It would be interesting to.
Well, what we'd have to do is whatever data we get, we would need to put it into a format that we can slice into with using a trib.
Right. I was just going to add tribs. Right. So we have the. How are we going to know the IP address?
The IP address of what?
The WSMan interface.
We won't to begin with.
Would the DH... shoot. So from an architectural perspective, do we assign it an IP address out of DHCP? Assuming that somebody just our network? If they're on the admin network, they're going to get it.
We would, if it's configured to do DHCP.
Okay.
There's no guarantee that it will be.
Okay, so today we configure the WSMan interface from IPMI?
Well, the WSMan interface is the IPMI interface.
How do we set
they have the same with IPMI?
Sorry.
With IPMI tool from Sledgehammer is the answer you're looking for.
Okay.
Yeah, so I wouldn't go gung-ho on removing the need for Sledgehammer at this point.
Does it also set the credentials?
That's still our method of configuring IPMI and therefore the WSMan interface.
No, that's fine. But once that interface is set, we can go out of band. So you still go in band.
Well, we go out of band for things that it's useful to go out of band for, and in band for things that it's useful to go in band for.
Sure, not arguing that. But does that mean that we don't need the? I guess I'm trying to eliminate the proxy, and the need to set up the proxy on the Crowbar server. And maybe I shouldn't be.
We won't need to.
Or the router. Sorry.
We won't need the router anymore if we're doing it right. Because the only reason the router exists was because our previous architecture didn't have a WSMan jig, so it was doing all of the actual work from the chef recipes that were running on the node that we were trying to configure. That's the only reason the proxy existed. Or the not the proxy, but the masquerading rule.
So, from an actual story and work perspective, so there's actually a story for set the WSMan, set the. We have to do that as part of it.
So it's a shame Judd's not on the call. I wanted to ask him about the colo space that he'd acquired.
He might join us after the cloud stand-up, which unfortunately conflicts. This call. I know he's also working to ask for hardware donations to see if people in the community want to. We have space to see if people in the community want to help donate gear to get that space running.
Well, I mean, the first piece of gear that we would need would be, we're going to have KVM access, which is good. We need some sort of just local node to do the build and run an admin node from.
Right. No, and as soon as we have a spec for that, I'll get that gear in there.
I mean, the node that we can run an admin node can be any old box. It doesn't have to be a Dell hardware or a piece of. It could be pretty much anything, like an old crappy laptop.
Oh. Okay.
So, I mean, we're going to be doing the Docker or the KVM based admin node anyways.
True. It doesn't even need an iDRAC on it, does it?
Nope.
But rated drives at least. Okay. Let's figure out what one of those is and if somebody.
And I was thinking of picking up like a T320 just for fooling around at home. But if I can have easy access to the colo, that'd be good too.
I want to do the same thing. So I'm ready to. If we have a spec that I can buy, I will order one or two.
Yeah. Researching online, it looks like avoid the H310 at all costs because it has sucky write performance.
It has what performance?
Sucky write performance.
Oh. Huh. What's speed drives?
Huh?
What is it a drive issue? Why would it have bad write performance?
No cache.
Oh, okay. That would cause it. I was actually looking in here to help build the spec. Okay. So did we move far enough that I think we can actually start building? We can actually do a little bit of work towards this jig. Mm-hmm. At least build the no-op roles, potentially create some other roles. We know we at least need WSMan credentials.
I think we could start doing that, and we could probably start getting a feel for what that consistent interface starts looking like. One comment I had on RAID setup is we have a history of calling this RAID setup, but in a lot of cases it's not just RAID. You know, it's disk controller. I don't know if we want to change that, but you know, I mean, in most of the Hadoop servers, we'll potentially have a RAID for the operating system, but in general, we're dealing with plain HBAs.
Yeah.
You know, I think we got in the habit of calling it RAID because we potentially started configuring RAID controllers, but it's really just disk controllers.
So why don't we then? I think that's a really good thing to put in here as a change. All right. So instead of calling it RAID, we're calling it disk. And does this stay BIOS, or does this switch to compute from that perspective?
No, it doesn't switch to compute at all. Because we're gonna configure the BIOS differently depending on whether we're aiming towards an I/O intensive or a node that should be I/O intensive versus a node that should be compute intensive.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with BIOS. I mean, you know, it's eventually going to be IPMI, but everybody still calls it BIOS, so stuck with us forever.
Well, IPMI and BIOS will be different things.
Yeah, but I think in terms of calling it, well, would there be a metal IPMI conf? Or,
yeah.
Yeah.
What am I saying? I'm saying IPMI. I meant UFI, but brain burp.
UFI is also a completely
A BIOS.
different thing.
But
Well,
yeah,
would UFI be different? Would UFI be a different role? I guess is the question.
I don't see why it would be a different role at this point. It's just a configuration bit that you would flip in the BIOS to tell it what mode to boot into. As far as how that affects our managing the system, for R series gear, it doesn't. And I don't know for C series gear because we only had a couple of the C series gear that would do UFI to begin with, and we never set them up to do that.
Yeah, but I guess thinking out loud here again, I mean, whether it's a UFI BIOS or a traditional BIOS kind of really doesn't matter. I think most people call it UFI BIOS, although technically it's not a BIOS. But getting off on a tangent, I do like the disk config as opposed to RAID config. I think that's better.
I'm in favor. That makes sense to me. So we're actually going to call it disk configuration from that perspective. The WS main can handle disk and BIOS configs. So.
Yes, it can.
Cool.
I've got to check though.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Some of the controllers, like the LSI controllers, have their own BIOS settings that are only accessible in traditional BIOS mode. I don't know if WSMan can get to those.
Well, yeah, for it to be managed via WSMan, the BIOS has to be, or its firmware has to be written to allow WSMan to manage it. And some of the LSI controllers are written that way. You still have to fall back to their crappy tool set.
Right. Are we going to need other roles, or are there more intermediate states that we have to worry about from this perspective?
We'll burn those bridges when we get there.
Well, I'm thinking about major levels of this. Like, I guess we're going to have IPMI configured, which is going to be the first. So basically, it's going to work out like this.
Well, the way I see the roles split up is that things like IPMI, WSMan, and the other kind of the hardware management tools, they all have discovery roles that run during Sledgehammer just to discover what management capabilities a node has and report that back to Crowbar. And they also all have configuration roles that their entire purpose in life is to get whatever that hardware is configured so that the crowbar can talk to it using whatever set of credentials and communication methods that we're going to need to use to talk to that. And then once both of those roles have done their thing, then the jig that does the actual work would be ready to be used. And that's kind of what we do for the chef jig right now. If we're setting up a chef server, we have a role that when the admin node starts, stands up a chef server and extracts a client, or extracts a client that has admin privileges, and injects those credentials into Crowbar, so the chef jig can use those credentials directly to essentially be the admin chef client for everything else that we manage. And I would reuse that pattern for IPMI and for WSMan. Am I still there, or did I hang up?
You're here. I'm thinking about what you said, and that made me think through if you weren't using WSMan but were using the direct on hardware DTK tools, or the in-band stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You would ultimately have a provides chain, an alternate provides chain for that, right?
Yeah, and we try to set it up so all those hardware management jigs, had approximately the same API or the same interface.
Right.
So the rest of the tools that want to, or the rest of Crowbar that wants to go in and configure whatever, as long as there's something that's bound to the node that exposes the capability to configure like disks or BIOS settings or whatever, the rest of Crowbar doesn't care how it's done.
So this is
based on to the node that says do this configuration, and then that gets farmed off to the appropriate management jig to actually do the work.
Okay. So what you're saying is we would restore the requested configuration, disk RAID configuration, on the metal ready, because that's the only constant role from that perspective. So if you added metal ready, or if you added Hadoop and you had the metal ready role in your system, then you could say, I want this RAID system, I want this configuration. Right, because it doesn't, the order of the attributes doesn't matter particularly, does it?
I don't know. Does it matter?
I don't think so, because when you pull together the attribute collection, it goes and finds them against they're a single namespace, so it's going to pull them from upstream or downstream. As far as I believe.
Yeah, if you're referencing an attribute against the node, it doesn't matter it doesn't care about what node role it pulls it from.
Right. Well, or its precedence, right? Whether it's ahead or behind. So in this case,
it tries to look ahead, but it ultimately doesn't care. As long as that attribute is somewhere on the node, or bound to something that's bound to the node, it'll pick it up.
Right. So in this case, the Hadoop or OpenStack or whatever barclamp roles, still want to call them barclamps, roles would add configuration to the metal ready no object, because that's the constant, right, no matter how we do things. And then
they wouldn't even have no, that's too complicated.
Okay.
They wouldn't have to do that at all. We
just set the friggin' attribute. You're right.
Straight on that node, straight on that Hadoop node role, and just let it do its thing. And then whenever whatever node role that winds up actually doing the work of configuring the disk is called, and it looks up the attribute on the node, it'll find it on the Hadoop config node role, or whatever we decide to call it.
Oh, that's not what I was expecting you to say. So we're going to need attributes for the role itself that are things like, what type of attributes would we have? Disks. So you'd have something like disk sets, and then there would
As
actually
long
be
as they adhere to a common name, then it doesn't matter what they are, and it doesn't matter what node role has them.
Right, but what we'd end up with is something like array 1. We're going to end up needing some. I'm thinking through what that would look like. So we'd have an attribute probably called something like disk arrays or disk sets, and you'd be able to say array 1, array 1, something like. Do you see where I'm typing?
No.
And so what I'm considering is Hadoop would then set the attribute, the Hadoop role when it came in, and it wouldn't even worry about whether the capabilities are there. It would just set the attribute for disk set array 1 is it wants this, disk set array 2 it wants that, and go. I'm trying to think of how you actually set the RAID and BIOS. Maybe I'm thinking too far ahead, but it seems like a good time to talk about it. Yeah, maybe I'm too far ahead. Because one of the things, Mike, that you see as a requirement is that we have to be able to have a variety of disk configuration options.
Definitely. I mean, in the Hadoop space, the preference is of vanilla HBA, but in some cases, RAID controllers are needed even for the data drives. On the operating system side, we see requirements for either software RAID or hardware RAID, sometimes using the chipset controllers. So there's definitely a need for flexibility in the disk configs.
Okay. We're gonna have to think through how to enumerate this. I know we've already done some work on that, but.
Interesting. Yeah, and the other complexity is not all of that is actually at the metal level. Especially things like if you're using the Linux MD interface, it's really almost purely software. On the other hand, it's effectively done at the operating system level. So once you can boot an OS, you work with it at that level.
Yeah, there's almost two passes through that. It's not the metal interface at that point. It's a different part. It's a different role that has a different dependency chain. So what we're saying is that there's actually there's a Crowbar OS installed state, no up state for this. And what you're saying is that there is something jig that does a OS disk conf. Yep, that's exactly what it would look like. Or it would be a provisioner disk. Victor, would you do that would the provisioner do that, or the deployer?
I'm sorry. I got distracted.
That's fine. What I'm saying is really confusing. So if we had a post Crowbar OS installed role that handled OS soft rating and disk configuration, would that be in the provisioner or the deployer bar clamp, or none of the above?
That has to be done as part of OS installation.
So, right. So it's before OS installed?
During.
It has to be. Yeah, during. So, but the ending role in that chain is Crowbar OS installed. OS is not installed until after that's done. But it's done after in the chain. It's got to be in the chain of some in the provisioner. It's a provisioner then.
Yeah, it has to be done in the provisioner.
Right. So there's an intermediate state in the provisioner where it's done installing the OS and it can do a provisioner disk configuration.
Yeah, but that's only if we're going to worry about doing the soft RAID.
Yes. No, I'm just, since Mike brought it up, I'm thinking through the flow chain of where to do that, because I think it helps describe some of the flexibility of the system to do hard and soft RAID for that. I'm going back to the agenda for a second, because we're within 5 minutes. All right. I actually think we've done a good job with this.
I think we made good progress on that. We haven't touched Docker.
Yeah, Docker, I was hoping to have sat down with you, Mike, and sort of gone through the Docker for Dev workflow and start designing it.
Yeah, I've actually done some of that right now. I'm actually rebuilding my dev environment. I need to get off Fedora. It's just the issue with Fedora is it just every time there's an update, something's breaking. And it's okay for playing around with stuff, but I'm shifting over to CentOS for my dev at ENV. So I'll have Docker up and running there in a few days.
So what I was hoping to work with you, and maybe we can just get on the phone and do it as a live session, but I was going to, and I want to do this for the hardware one too, just create some stub no-op roles and work through the process. So I think I might try to do the Docker for Dev against the IPMI bar clamp. And I know it won't do any IPI configuration, but at least I can no-op it and let the IPMI configuration hit, and then I can pull back. Victor, the IPMI is going to fail on a VM too, right? It's got to be on physical gear to do anything.
Yeah.
What did you want to accomplish in terms of using Docker for Dev?
Thank you. What I want to be able to do is show how to do the configuration of a workload. It doesn't have to be Chef, but Chef is easy. Of a workload using Docker. So be able to do the OpenStack deployment or some of the Hadoop. Like for you've described a whole bunch of Hadoop things that need to be done to prep an environment. So what I was hoping to see is build the Hadoop workload, create the no-op roles, run those. Actually, let me take a second. I'll walk through exactly
literally we're talking about just doing the deployment in Docker to test out the dev env. In the dev env. Okay.
But I think we actually need to walk through the process to say, okay, create the no-op roles, show how those run, create the a sample Chef run that does this one thing, verify that it works, and then show how we build up a deployment in Docker, and actually then can validate the deployment.
Okay.
It ends up being as much, here's how you build a new workload bar clamp from scratch.
Yeah, this becomes more like a bar clamp tutorial using Docker.
Yes.
That's really what it is.
That's all. Yep, that's it.
Okay. I thought you meant something else because the Docker support's there and we've been doing this. So this is just really an example of what does the workflow look like.
Yeah, well, we have the Docker piece, but we've never shown a developer how to take advantage of it to build a new, the OpenStack cookbooks or anything like that. So that's really all I was trying to accomplish with that.
Let's schedule another meeting to go through that.
Okay.
I'm probably 48 hours away from actually having the new dev environment built, but
cool. Well, let's try it for Friday because I'll be available and back on Friday, and hopefully I'll have some plane time to get on this.
Okay, sounds good. Let's aim for Friday and see if we can run through it.
Okay. And then what I'd love to see us do is get this sample spec because I want to buy. I'm itching to spend money on hardware. Because, Victor, if you have a spec in mind, and know what you want to buy, I'll just order the same thing.
Okay. I'll
Okay.
shoot you over what I was looking.
Cool. I was hoping to have Randy to eyeball it just because I think he's always catches errors and omissions.
Yes.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thank you for participating. This is, I think, really helpful.
This one was useful. Got some actual design work done.
It's amazing what you can talk about in an hour. Everybody, thank you very much, and I'll see you all next week.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.